This is part 4 of a commentary I'm doing with 8363MTR on the mysterious Mr. Enter. If you have not seen the first 3 parts yet, which total over 2 hours, I'd recommend doing so before going forward.
Has Arthur done anything else? Because this debate just gets me in such a foul mood.
I can't believe someone would be hurt like that, just because they're black.
Wow, what a funny, epic May XD. We're already off to a great start. You know, if you can't tell by my incredibly well-done sarcasm that is about as original as Enter's meme choices.
Yeah, I don't even care for the fact that I'm being called out for this next point about me nitpicking here, but it really says something that both Enter and Coda Adofia have no taste in memes. Seriously, that clip is overused to the point where I didn't laugh at it. It was so predictable that I could see it from a mile away, and I'm actually getting the headache from it. Do you really want me to play a clip of my co-op commentary with Space Screw 5 about Head On as a placebo? Because I'm still feeling that migraine after all of these years. Oh, I'm sorry. Not enough nitpicks? Alright, let's talk about the second reason as to why we've been doing these synopses towards these PSAs. And to start off, your transitions are shit. There are moments in the video where you've placed in the subtitle card of the cartoon that you're reviewing, like Bun Control, for example, but it's not consistent with the other parts of the review, where Enter just gives us whiplash after whiplash of what else he's reviewing. It also doesn't help, too, that even if it was clear as day as he was talking about another Arthur Psa, it did come off as a little bit confusing considering that he then made it absolutely, without a single of a doubt, very clear that he's reviewing another PSA. In fact, he actually jumped right into the review of the other PSA and didn't have enough time to talk about the synopsis of this next PSA. This brings me to a big point that I need to make. It's that Enter doesn't explain the synopsis of these PSAs, or at the very least doesn't do a very good job at that, such as Bun Control and how he only mainly talks about the climax and ending of it. The greenhouse is something in which case that comes closest to it, though he still doesn't do a good job at it because it seems like he's bouncing around in the episode and mainly just rants about renewable energy like how an old man would scream at a cloud. This is actually a huge issue because he's assuming that his audience would actually know what the synopsis for each episodes or PSAs, when yet I'll even be honest when I say that I haven't seen about half of what Enter talked about, such as the Greenhouse episode or any of the Arthur PSAs or even Lil Dicky's song 2. And I'll be honest when I say that I prefer not to listen to that Lil Dicky song anymore. Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't assume your audience is dumb, but at the very least, assume that your audience might not know the source material and explain it. You kinda have went in and done that with Strange Magic, though I wish that you didn't jump around, but I could be wrong about that review. And you've done it during the episodic reviews earlier back then. What happened to that? Also, I'm not saying that you should do what Nostalgia Critic does and riff the source material as you move along, but at the very least, don't try to leave information out. Speaking of Little Dicky, I can get that it's either difficult or impossible to explain the synopsis for a song. But what you could have done was explain what the song was, or who Little Dicky was, or the fact that other artists like Ariana Grande and Justin Bieber were in the song too. Or, really, anything else to get audience members follow along with it. So, with that being said, would you, Ephrom, like to make the synopsis for the second Arthur PSA?
Gladly! The second Arthur PSA has Arthur wanting to chat with Buster after the both of them saw a video about someone treating a black individual unfairly. They didn't reference George Floyd. In fact, Buster directly says, quote, "How could it happen here in Elwood City, so it could potentially be just someone bullying a black kid because they're black." After discussing it for a bit, Arthur gets the idea to invite Mrs. Grady into the video chat so she can talk about how important it is to stand up against racism, and that it could happen to anyone. Her solution is to talk about it and not be afraid to ask questions about the issue while acting out and standing up against it. After that, Arthur and Buster decide to ask their parents about racism and leave the video chat, while she talks to the audience to have people remember to talk, listen, and act. At the very end, there's a still screen about remembering John Lewis, the civil rights activist and former United States representative who died of pancreatic cancer.
So, I'm going to need you to point out the problems with Arthur tackling this particular subject matter. If you don't get it, let me explain. In Arthur, the characters, don't have race. They have species of animals, yes, like aardvarks and rabbits, but you'd have to be MatPat to assume that they had an in-universe reason.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
Hey MatPat, you just got entered! No one is safe. This video is painful.
This is a conscious choice that many shows made back in the day to make race irrelevant in their world. It was one of the main reasons that shows used anthropomorphic animals. There are no black people in Arthur's universe because there are no people of any race in Arthur's universe.
I mean, true, but we did have characters that are indeed meant to be of certain races. Remember the Brain, or Alan Powers as his real name? In Arthur's Perfect Christmas, he mentions that he celebrates Kwanzaa, a holiday that is celebrated by black people, specifically those of African American culture, between December the 26th to January the 1st. In fact, he also has a cousin named Sheik that's originally from Africa but moved to America. There's also the fact that celebrity guest appearances like Coco Taylor and Taj Mahal, two black celebrities, appeared in animal form. I know that you've jokingly said that you have to be MatPat to make a theory about this, but one thing was certain was that the characters themselves do say the term human. For example, there's the fact that there were countless times where they would say human in the show, such as you are Arthur within the introduction, human treasure lad, not buried treasure, or in season 13 in Paradise Lost, when Kate begins to lose her comprehension of Pal's speech. Pal's a dog, mind you. Amigo, another dog, explains, this happens to all human children. I remember when it happened to Facita. This might just be the writers not knowing what other terminology to use for their species, or wanting the children to not have a hard terminology within the show, or that humans used to be a part of the world until the anthropomorphic animals took over, but this could also be that they themselves do see each other as human, but they only look like animals to the audience. But, alright. Let's play the twisted game of pretend. Let's pretend that this still doesn't matter and that canonically they're anthropomorphic animals. So, question then. Who's the demographic for the show?
Are you asking me?
I mean, this question is really for everybody who's watching this, but sure, the question can apply to you.
I'm going to guess children.
That's not the answer that I was looking for, as I was looking for human children. Ya forgot that we're Homo sapiens. Yeah, it's no duh that they're anthropomorphic, but the thing about that is that they're talking to preschool children who are still developing. I could be wrong about this, so please correct me if possible, but I don't honestly think that there's some children that young who will connect the dots to race with us if they talk about speciesism for them. They know about race in itself. I have a point later on in the video about that, but I don't generally know if they'll be smart enough to equate race with animals. Like, sure, you shouldn't expect children to be dumb, but this is a big topic that children would not connect the dots like this, which is why we need to simplify it if you want to get the message across easily.
We can see this also in things like Doug, where all the characters are Technicolor specifically for this reason.
Even though Doug, the main character, is actually white, and they intentionally made him white.
They also made him bald. Scholars are divided on the reason for this.
According to Jezebel's article, why was Doug from Doug white when everybody else was multicolored? One of the executive producers said in the book Slimed, an oral history of Nickelodeon's golden age, and I quote, "Look, we're not black people, we're not Mexican, but we want the cartoon to speak to all groups. How do we get past the barrier of ethnicity?" And Jim Jenkins, the show's creator, said, "Let's try coloring them all different colors." Even though Jenkins didn't predict the audience to relate Skeeter as being black, though he was fond of it. This wasn't due to privilege-based blindness, nor an accident either. Quoting from the article again, Gus Hassler, one of Nickelodeon's founders, amidst the network's decision to market their programming to kids with cable costume to pander to an affluent, presumed white market. The others didn't get Nickelodeon. Children who couldn't afford cable were getting some children's programming from PBS. Sure, it brings up issues of diversity and income level. And in some way, even though that wasn't their fault or they didn't plan this out of malicious intent, this was kinda still a problem considering that many of the main protagonists from different shows are predominantly white men/boys, especially back then, and both either in cartoons or real life. There's an article published in 2012 made by Nicole Martins and Kristen Harrison that examines the racial and gender differences in the relationship between children's television use and self-esteem. They only focus on those who are either white or black, and categorize them into 4 groups, that being within their respective race and gender. What they found was that black and white girls, as well as black boys, had a decrease in self-esteem when watching television, and an increase in self-esteem among white boys. Why is that? Well, there's 3 main reasons why. There's the fact that the majority of television content serves to reinforce both gender roles and racial stereotypes, the overall concerns of portrayals of white female characters and black characters on the screen, and it could be due to the fact that television viewing is displacing real-life experiences that might build self-esteem. I mean, fuck, why do you think, especially after your video's release, there were videos within the art community and in the animation community that talks about how diversity in kids shows are extremely important. Essentially, even with the fact that Doug had a colorful cast, and I meant that in a literal way, the main protagonist was actually white because it was, at the time, trying to appeal to white children, presumably mainly white boys, because black children or other children of color might not afford television or cable at the time. In fact, that being the representation in the show, and admittedly your overall point, would have been better if Doug, the character, and his parents were also of a different color.
It's something that even happens to this day. Frisk is yellow in Undertale as well to take race out of the equation.
Because, as we all know, no racial group nor ethnicity is associated with the color yellow.
Actually, Ephraim, what Enter says here is true. The character of Undertale, Toby Fox, did make Frisk in no particular race.
That very well may be true, but my point is more that despite trying to make Fritz racially ambiguous, Toby Fox picked a color already associated with a certain race or ethnicity, in this case the color yellow, which in the real world is commonly associated with the Chinese. This is actually a common pitfall people fall into when they try to make characters that are racially neutral. Usually they just end up making characters that are probably not white.
It's not enough to just say, I'm not racist. It's not my problem. We have to actively fight against racism.
So we get to our final stop on this train. So, in late May of 2020, a man named George Floyd was killed in the hands of police officers. It became another example in a long line of incidences of police brutality aimed specifically at minorities.
Okay, John. All I'm going to say is, this was probably not your best choice for an avatar with that specific image on screen.
But this was a tipping point for many. Protests and civil unrest sparked all across the United States, sometimes ending up as riots. They continued for over 100 days, and there was a sense of outrage among the country. There is a lot of controversy surrounding the situation, and as I record this, the trial is ongoing. The full body camera footage was actually leaked to the public sometime later, and it mired the situation quite a bit, as well as Floyd having a controversial past, but you'd be hard-pressed to believe that he, or Breonna Taylor, or any of the other numerous individuals who have been shot and killed by police deserve to die. In cases of actual crime, the police are there to apprehend and not to execute. This is a very serious discussion that could probably take up a full video that I'm not entirely comfortable making, but it gave rise to mantras of all cops are family unfriendly expletive.
Okay, John. All I'm going to say is, this was probably not your best choice for an avatar with that specific image on screen. Also, some of you may be wondering why I'm including this segment even though I'm not really commentating on it, and that's because, although I do feel this is the worst part of the video, I don't necessarily think John's understanding of the issue of race is all that bad. It's just incredibly surface level. Remember how John said that the Animaniacs reboot felt like it was written in 2016 but came out in 2018, which, side note, is an incredibly specific way to call something outdated. You'll see what I mean as we go on, but just know that these are the same points you probably heard in like 2016 and 2017, And they didn't really hold water back then, but they especially don't hold water now because, well, we tried those things, and look at where it got us. If you want to know why radical ideas become appealing, John, it's because moderation fails. It's really that simple. And this is what makes this whole talk John did earlier about reaching out to the other side so frustrating, because if John would have actually talked to anti-racists, he would see a lot of the points he brings up get addressed. However, he didn't do that, so he's just kind of floundering around for a bit.
Talk about racism with your friends, your parents, your teachers.
Hey Fred, we're about to play some Mario Kart, you want in? Sure, but I think we should talk about how predominantly black schools are underfunded due to a systemically racist Department of Education. Okay Fred, not this again. We're trying to play a fucking game here.
She meant when there's a time and a place for it, not to do that whenever the situation isn't right. Like, you're pretty much misinterpreting what the teacher is trying to say here.
Racism is definitely a bad thing and an evil in this world, and it should be fought against. However, not every single person or weapon is equally useful in this attempt. For example, Barbie. Barbie wants to tell you all how bad racism is. Yes, Barbie. The doll. The doll.
Okay, so I guess we're just done with the Arthur PSA now. Love the abrupt lack of transition, really do.
Now, normally we're going to be saying the synopsis for this PSA, but because of not only one mistake that Enter makes, but also with how he doesn't really review the actual PSA except for this next interjection, we're actually going to be holding parts of it off on this PSA for now and save that until later on. After that, except for one other instance, we're going to stop giving out the synopsis for the PSAs because Enter at the very least did his best that he could do in the synopsis department.
Hey everybody.
Oh god, another one of these things. Okay, maybe animated characters should not vlog. Like, seriously, it's weird as hell seeing a cartoon character stare awkwardly at the camera. They're not supposed to do that. 2D or 3D, it barely works in live action. For vlogging to work, you need to be really expressive. And this stilted animation just makes it look uncanny, like a Barbie doll.
So, I remember when someone on Twitter showed 2 clips in one video towards 2 of Enter's points. Specifically the Nikorama review of the X's as well as the Nikorama review of Cat Scratch, where he talks about some of the voice actors from each show.
Hi, Ephraim in Post. You may remember me from the last video. I also have some opinions on this clip that I was just supposed to play unedited, and oh boy, do I kind of want to share them.
This might be just me, but I have a low tolerance for people who are paid to do a specific voice. Again and again and again. It just takes me right out of the experience. It usually breaks my immersion when I can't watch Sarah Lynn from BoJack Horseman without thinking of Mabel from Gravity Falls.
Okay, so John can suspend his disbelief to the point where he can perfectly enjoy a show with anthropomorphic talking horses, but 2 people sounding the same, that just crosses a line for him. He can't believe that.
It is always distracting. Tuesday's friend is Gretchen from Recess. I cannot like your show if you're constantly reminding me of a better show. And they constantly do that with the voice acting. Speaking of which, Patrick Warburton plays the father. I have several issues with this. I really wish, and this sounds completely backwards, but I really wish that people stopped using Patrick Warburton to play Patrick Warburton's famous roles. Every single time I hear Patrick Warburton in a cartoon, I hear Kronk. And guess who he's playing every time he's in a cartoon? He's playing Kronk. Another version of Kronk. Again and again and again and again.
And if you're someone like me who was introduced to Patrick Warburton via his role as Joe Swanson on Family Guy, you're probably incredibly confused right now. It doesn't help that John really doesn't explain what this character and Kronk from Emperor's New Groove have in common. He just kind of says that and expects his audience to accept that. This also ignores why someone might be typecasted. For example, it's perfectly possible that Warburton just chooses to consistently play these roles because that's what he feels like he is best at. I mean, we've all seen cases where an actor has gone into a role that is clearly not right for them, and Warburton just doesn't want to rock that boat and would rather stay where it's safe. Now, is that a good idea for acting? Well, that's up for the actor to decide, but I personally wouldn't say so. However, that's his decision, and you should be petitioning him and not holding it against the show. After all, the best way to get an acting gig in Hollywood is prior experience, and who's going to have the prior experience to play loud, angry characters besides somebody who consistently plays loud, angry characters. You see what I mean here, John? It's this feedback loop. This is also ignoring the fact that this happens in the live-action world, too. This isn't exclusive to animation. I mean, when was the last time you saw Pauly Shore in an Oscar film? That's what I thought.
It's getting old. This is just Kronk that another show stole. Every single time I hear Patrick Warburton playing the same exact role. Cartoons like this just take character acting to another level. Even if that's not true, it's just always the same problem. Not helping is the voice is incredibly similar to Archer's voice from, well, Archer. You know, another cartoon that coincidentally happens to star spies.
Okay, John, what are you implying? That Archer ripped off the X's? And for that matter, they really don't sound similar. Especially considering Archer is played by an entirely different actor, who is also the same actor that plays Bob in Bob's Burgers. This is even lampshaded in an episode of Archer. So I just don't get your point here.
It seems like a relatively normal premise for a cartoon. It follows three cats: Mr. Blick, voiced by Dojo from Shaolin Showdown, Waffle, voiced by Pleakley from Lilo and Stitch, and Gordon, voiced by Scotland. I know that I keep bringing this up over and over again, but this is something that does legitimately bother me. When voice actors use the same voice for every single thing. It's called voice acting, people. Actors play people who are different than themselves. Consider trying it once in a while.
I refer you back to my earlier interjection. If you can believe everything that occurs in Cat Scratch, but you cannot believe that one person in one show sounds similar to another person in another show, then I just don't get how your suspension of disbelief works. I'm sorry, I just don't. People in real life occasionally sound the same. Sorry, it's the truth. I don't even necessarily disagree that Enter's complaint is invalid, although I do find his pretentious way of saying it's called voice acting to be off-putting, to say the least. But with that said, I do think that, to be blunt, it doesn't particularly matter in a cartoon like this. Oh, also, while I'm on a roll, because this has bothered me for years...
There's one more thing about the show that bothers me. It's the voice acting. All of the voice actors are very professional, but they were given absolutely no direction to differentiate themselves from their other roles. You wanna know what I'm talking about? Listen to this.
I'm glad you're finally here. Would you be a dear and fetch my bags, servant girl?
Excuse me? What did you just call me? Servant girl?
Oh, many pardons, or my bad. What do people call yourselves these days?
Okay, John, I see what you're going for here, but there are two problems. The first one being that Clara's voice is softer than Twilight Sparkle's, meaning that there is a noticeable difference. And second off, am I the only one who thinks it's a little unfair to hold the fact that Twilight Sparkle and Clara sound the same against Drawn Together, considering Drawn Together came out 6 years before Friendship is Magic did? Don't get me wrong, I understand the reason why you're mentally making the connection is most likely because you've watched Friendship is Magic before you watched Drawn Together, but at that point, is it really the fault of the show? Well, I'd say no, and this is something you even acknowledge in your review of Cat Scratch.
If you haven't seen Shaolin Showdown or Lilo and Stitch, well, first of all, watch Lilo and Stitch and maybe consider Shaolin Showdown after you've seen Avatar. But if you haven't, this might not be much of a problem to you.
So again, is it really fair to criticize a show for something that most viewers wouldn't even notice? If anything, that sounds like the definition of nitpicking. Anyway, back to you, MTR.
Why did I bring this up? Well, to quote the mysterious Mr.Enter here, same energy. Same fucking energy. The issues with the two clips that we've played, as well as this interjection here, is that Mr.Enter is put in a rule/guideline that seems either unfair or seems kinda stupid in hindsight when they really shouldn't be a rule to begin with. It comes across as you having this strict way towards doing animations, and it could potentially mean that you might be wrong about this rule/guideline. For example, and from what the OP of that Twitter account said, "You're totally right, Mr. Enter. Voice actors with a distinct voice should be used once and never ever be used again. It's not like this voice acting can require using that distinct voice and through great acting makes it fit the different personalities." That's crazy. To give an example, that's like saying that you don't like Richard Horvitz voice acting in Hell of a Boss when he sounds exactly like Zim from Invader Zim, even though that these two characters have different personalities. With Moxie, the character that Richard stars in, being more of a vocal and realistic of the main cast regarding the workplace that he works in, So less screaming out nonsense and more talking in a calm manner most of the times, even though that he gets easily annoyed. Whereas Zim is usually brash, arrogant, and overconfident. But nope! According to Enter standards, Moxie sounds exactly like Zim, with the only exception that Zim swears now. Within this point here, however, you're making an arbitrary rule/guideline about animation because apparently you have a problem with cartoon characters looking at the camera. The issue with this point here is that you're supposed to look at the camera as if you're supposed to look at your audience. Hence the fact that Barbie and her friend, Nikki, are talking to their audience. It's important to note that when it comes to vlogs, especially when you're sitting down, you need to have engagement with your audience, and looking somewhere else indicates that you're not engaging with your audience, unless if you're not talking about them, or if something important comes up, or even if you're searching at your phone to look up important information, you know, nuances. In some cases, it's the same with your avatar stills and my avatar stills, because you're talking to the audience and you want to stimulate the importance of eye contact. Also, for vlogging work, you need to be really expressive. Honestly, I disagree with your viewpoint on the Barbie vlog. We see Barbie and Nikki smiling, using her hands for movement, having a camera persona, differences in tone, maintaining eye contact, etc. that's considered to be expressive. I don't know where you get the idea that they're not expressive, possibly with the idea that, oh no, they're not moving around, they're stiff. But yet, when they're not moving around like walking, they don't really have anything to do besides sitting in front of a camera and talking to their audience. Like, what else do you really think that they should do? What other actions do you want that needs to be expressive? I am lost at what you want to see as the solution here. Are you expecting them to fidget or something, like touching their hair or do what every other person does? If so, then this might not work in 2D or in 3D because it might be a bit too distracting for people to take in.
This PSA has a problem that the Arthur one does, which is why I'm tackling them next to each other.
People might think that my life looks fine, but the truth is, I and so many other black people have to deal with racism.
Now, here's something that I don't know if you've noticed, but this character is, well, a fictional character. Their entire life and every experience within is completely made up. I can show you my character and say that she's had to go through X, Y, and Z as a girl and that sexism is bad, but it doesn't change the fact that I made them up, both the character and the sexism that she's been exposed to.
So novels like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Watsons Go to Burlingham also must do a bad job discussing racism because they're fictional, right? How about anti-war novels like Slaughterhouse-Five? Hell, its recollection of the bombings it describes are so historically inaccurate, they rely on the works of people like David Irving. How about anti-sexism novels like The Handmaid's Tale or The Stepford Wives? I mean, nothing in those novels actually happened, so therefore they cannot shine a light on things that actually go on in the real world, right? What about anti-authoritarian novels like 1984? I mean, Winston Smith wasn't real, so how could his character comment on the struggles of living in an authoritarian society? For that matter, I don't think Joseph Stalin was a farm animal, so Animal Farm is also out the window. Do you see the issue with this kind of overall thinking? I mean, John, you're an author yourself. You of all people should know that fiction can be used to shine a light on real-world experiences.
In both of these PSAs, they talk about fictional examples of racism. The Arthur one is more close to what actually happened, but it's so vague that you'll only know what he's talking about if you actually directly know about George Floyd. Meanwhile, not only is the Barbie one made up, it's completely off-screen. It's one thing if it's like in the context of an episode about racism, but these are coming off like actual people trying to talk about a real-world issue, when they're clearly and patently making shit up.
Again, I refer you to my example of Slaughterhouse-Five from a minute ago. A book where the main character uses fucking time travel to see events that didn't actually happen in order to shine a light on the evils of war. You say this is okay if it's in the context of an episode, but that's just a nonsensical standard. So it's okay if you're doing it as part of the story, so long as the story is not delivered through a certain medium?
If the problem is bad, and the problem is bad, you should not need to make up fictional examples. All it does is dilute the problem and look like you're making it a bigger deal than it really is.
You know, I wonder how Enter would have acted during the actual civil rights movement. Hell, I wonder how he would have acted during the abolitionist movement when novels like Uncle Tom's Cabin were coming out. You know, the work that's widely cited as one of the most important pieces of media that caused people to turn against slavery?
Once again, if they did like an actual episode about this, I wouldn't have much of a problem. But no, these PSAs are about fictional events.
Okay, we get it. You don't have to harp on about why we shouldn't need to make shit up for a fictional story. Move on already. My co-op partner's brain is melting with this shit.
I wonder how Enter would react to reading Dracula, considering that novel is made up of journal entries from people who don't exist talking about events that never took place. Now, to be fair, I could understand John's point if the PSA were attempting to pass off these fictional stories as real events. Like, not just fictional attempts to explain real things, but as things that actually did happen. However, considering we're talking about a Barbie PSA and not the protocols of the Elders of Zion, I highly doubt that's the case.
In fact, I want you guys to actually hear Nikki's story here, because this is actually going to be the biggest problem with Enter's point.
Barbie and I had a sticker selling contest on the beach last month. We split up and went different directions to see who could sell the most. Well, while I was on the boardwalk, beach security stopped me 3 times.
What?
They asked me all these questions over and over, and they even called my mom. I never told you, but that's why I sold a few stickers that day. The security officers thought I was doing something bad, even though I was doing exactly what you were doing. And remember when we were going to join that French honor club at school? Mm-hmm. Well, I made a perfect score on the entrance test, but when the teacher, who didn't know me at all, gave me my results, he told me I only did well because I got lucky. He said he knew I couldn't speak French that well.
What? You speak French better than all of us. Why didn't you just stay in the club and prove him wrong?
I don't want to have to constantly prove and reprove myself.
Here's the thing about this, Enter. The story over here wasn't trying to pass off as if this quote-unquote actually happened. These stories were mainly used as an overall tool to not only relate to black audiences who watches the PSA, but also towards using this as an overall tool for kids and adults to listen to black voices, no matter how difficult or awkward it is. For example, for Nikki's first story, it was more so towards how black people have been stopped for things that they were doing nothing wrong towards. There's a study out in California that showed that within the year of 2019, when stopped, black people are more likely to have action taken rather than no action taken, which involves being searched, handcuffed, and curbside detention, whereas white people have less of a chance to be stopped and have an action taken. Not only that, but when police search black, Latino, and Native American people, they're less likely to find drugs, weapons, or other contraband compared to when they search white people. And this isn't actually a place where people are evenly mixed in these states and cities. To give an example of this, only 28% of drivers stopped by LAPD were black. They only account for just 9% of Los Angeles population.
I know what at least some of you are thinking. What? The organization that once beat the shit out of Rodney King for no reason and which hired Mark fucking Furman is still kind of racist to this day? Well, yeah. It turns out that when there's that much racism in an organization, it doesn't really go away when the most vulgar racists leave. It's kind of baked into the system. I don't know what we'd call this kind of racism. It's not really individual. It's more system-based? Systemic? Is that a word? Systemic? Oh yeah, that is a word.
Another example is with Nikki's second story about how people would perceive her as being dumb and that she got lucky. Because there's an overall stereotype against the black community that black people are perceived as being dumb. This is mainly due to the fact that, unfortunately, as an example, when comparing white people against black people on the ACTs, the 2015 ACT scores for African Americans were 17.1 compared to 22.4 for their white peers. The source I have actually goes on even further with things like
idiot.
It's okay if an actual human vlogger in the real world talks about this, like, Okay, I don't know any vloggers. Let's say Oprah starts a vlogging show. She can talk about any racism that she's experienced with credibility because she's a real person. We can assume that she's honest about her life experiences, and we're to assume that her stories are true. Especially because there are real-world consequences if the stories are not true. Like when Jussie Smollett made up a fake hate crime.
Yay, Mr.Enter is comparing apples to oranges again. Jussie Smollett's fake story is not comparable to the stories that Nikki made in the Barbie PSA, because Jussie was a dumbass who decides to fake a crime and make everyone believe that because he was dissatisfied with his pay on the show Empire. Whereas the Barbie PSA story was completely harmless because we know that it's a fictional story, but they're doing it as a means to tell a moral of the story. And it's also used as a means towards relating other black viewers to white viewers, especially when we have incidents like that. The key differences are knowing when it's fake, but it's for telling a fictional story with a moral, and trying to be fake and getting people to believe that it was real in real life.
Give some of those drug PSAs credit. They often talked about what would have happened if you took drugs, not what did happen to fictional characters. Although, yes, some of them did fail on that regard. But, not one of these racism PSAs even takes that step. This is my biggest issue with the whole silence is violence mantra. It's not that you're compelling certain people that they have to speak up if they don't want to be branded a racist. It's because some people should shut up because they're stupid. And anything they say can actually hurt the fucking cause. There's actual racism in this world. If you deny that, you're a moron. But if you feel the need to make shit up, you're worse than a moron. We shouldn't have to make things up to tell the full story.
Wait, how is that in relation to silence is violence? Isn't silence is violence more about not speaking up about racism because when you kept quiet, then it tells other people that it's okay for racists to harass racial minorities? I don't know which is more stupid. The fact that you thought that silence is violence is more about making shit up, or the fact that you want to blame that quote/movement all because a hack of an actor decides to fake his story.
Anyway, I want to get all the Steven Universe PSAs in the same video, and considering we've already been here for half an hour, I think it's best to just end it here if I want to do that. So, good night, and good luck.